Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. I'm Michelle Hislin. I'm the Executive Director of ActionAid Australia, and I'd like to welcome you all tonight and thank you for joining us for this event, this important conversation around Palestine and how we can continue our ongoing solidarity and calls for justice for Palestinians. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and of course any First Nations people here in the room. I think we all know that the Palestinian struggle for self-determination and for justice has many parallels with the struggle for First Nations justice in this country and the huge dispossession of land. So this conversation tonight is happening at a really important time. Many of you will know tomorrow is Nakba Day. It's a day of mourning and a reminder of the violent displacement of over 700,000 Palestinians during the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. It's also a reminder that the genocide in Palestine and the illegal occupation did not just start 2.5 years ago. It's been ongoing for decades. ActionAid has a long history of working in Palestine, not only as a humanitarian and development organisation working with local communities and local partners, but also as a strong voice for justice and accountability. For these past 2.5 years, our global federation has supported ActionAid Palestine's leadership, coordinating emergency relief and humanitarian aid during the genocide that has been broadcast live across the globe. A genocide that has killed or injured 10% of the population of Gaza, destroyed 90% of homes, schools, water and sanitation facilities, and has shown us some of the worst of humanity. And I think I've been traveling with Jamil this week, and he's always the first to remind us these aren't numbers. These are people's lives. These are people's homes. Here in Australia, ActionAid is proud to be part of a movement of Australians, including all of you in this room, demanding the Australian government step up and hold Israel to account for its genocide and illegal occupation. So it's a real honour tonight to be joined by Jamil Sawalmeh, ActionAid Palestine's Country Director, who has led the team undertaking an emergency response in Gaza and has travelled here from the West Bank to Australia for the first time. Jamil was born and raised in a refugee camp on the West Bank, and so he has first-hand lived experience of what it's like to live under occupation. He's also a strong activist and a voice for Palestinian self-determination and justice. So tonight we're going to hear first from Jamil, and then we'll be joined in conversation with two other powerful speakers, Noura Mansour, National Director of Democracy in Colour, welcome, and Sarah Baarini, a Naarm-based activist and organiser who is part of the Free Palestine movement here in Melbourne. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jamil. Come on up.
Just stand by the water because I will need it. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. As Michelle introduced me, so I work for ActionAid in Palestine, and I was born and raised in a refugee camp there in the West Bank, lived all my life in the West Bank, been traveling across the world, also continuing the advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian people. Let me start by saying that we truly appreciate and acknowledge all the solidarity and the support from the Australian public. What you have done in the streets of Australia has actually reached the people of Palestine, and it's highly appreciated. And we would like that to continue, because that's the only way we maintain our human conscience together, and we maintain to engage on issues related to injustice, occupation, and oppression. So that is truly appreciated. I would like to speak to you tonight. I don't have a speech, but I have a testimony from the ground. I live in the West Bank, but I've been working in the humanitarian sector for the past 25 years, worked directly in Gaza from 2014 to 2021. And the recent, let me just pick up on one of the points that Michelle mentioned. It did not start on October 2023. And it is very important for us when we address the question of Palestine is not to take a snapshot approach to history. Because it's very easy to isolate events and look at their direct repercussions in light of what is happening. It is very easy to consume the news when it's a very fast, vicious cycle of 24 to 48 hours and things just disappear. Unfortunately, what is happening in Palestine has been happening in the past 100 years. Some of the practices that Israel is doing now actually inherited from the British mandate and the British colonialism prior to 1948, the date of when Israel was established, and our Nakba as Palestinian refugees. And myself, I have a direct link to that. My family was expelled from the city of Jaffa on the Mediterranean in 1948 and ended up, I think 60% of the family ended up in refugee camps in Jordan. My part of the family ended up in refugee camps in the West Bank. And this is to say, when we look at the recent events, unfortunately, much of what was happening in the past few months does not make it to international media. And based on the fact that the world has been comfortable with a very fake ceasefire in Gaza, there's a false ceasefire, and everybody was comfortable with, at least at the international level, that since we have a ceasefire, that means things are becoming normal in Gaza, which actually is not the reality. And the only thing that have changed in Gaza is that people stopped dying at scale. So Israel stopped massacring people in huge numbers. However, the killing continued. It happens every day. And of course, the continuous systematic obstruction of aid and aid workers into Gaza still continues until the moment we speak. There's a very systematic, deliberate obstruction. Some reports indicated that Israelis were actually calculating the minimum amount of calories that people need to survive during an engineered famine and starvation in Gaza, and they were allowing aid in comparison to those minimum calories. and much more. But it's very important also to understand that the humanitarian situation in Gaza has not improved after the ceasefire. We haven't seen any significant improvement in any way. People were not returning to their homes because they've lost them. And as Michelle said, 90% of the structures in Gaza have been demolished, completely erased. And that includes everything, not only homes and schools and churches and mosques and universities, everything. And we haven't seen that aid was transported at scale, despite that the ceasefire agreement clearly states that, I don't want to go into numbers again, but we would like to say that before this war, Gaza was in need of 600 trucks per day of humanitarian aid or commercial goods to survive. Today, we're seeing anywhere between 60 to 70, in the best case, 100 trucks being transported into Gaza for people, for a civilian population who are cornered in 45% of the total area of Gaza and in need of everything. Everything. So people have lost everything completely. And it's very important for us to maintain addressing that and speaking about that, because the humanitarian situation in Gaza is not going to improve even if there is a full ceasefire and a full opening of the crossings. We're talking about total devastation. That's going to take us years and years to rebuild and reconstruct. And when we talk about reconstruction, I think it is always easy for us to imagine the physical side of the reconstruction. When we talk about rebuilding schools, rebuilding homes, water networks, electricity, roads, and everything else, the infrastructure to be rebuilt, that's the easiest part of the reconstruction. But it's very important also for us to consider what the human reconstruction means in the context where people were going through the horrors of the genocide, and that they have reached the level of devastation that we see now. What is our responsibility to stand next to these people, to hold them by the hand and rebuild them as human beings, rebuild them as society, because the social fabric was torn apart also through this genocide. There are many things that they will surface when people start catching a breath and coming to terms with what they have been through, what they have suffered. When they look around, because at this moment everybody is on survival mode. Okay, throughout the genocide, everybody were just trying to dodge the next missile or the next attack. Now I think everybody is trying to secure the next meal for their family, or figure out how they do a makeshift shelter for themselves or their families. But there will be time when these people will be faced by the reality. They will start looking around and try to understand or come to terms with the level of destruction and devastation around them. That's going to be a devastating moment for these people. And we need to be there next to them. We need to be there to accompany them through the journey of the human reconstruction. Again, that's very important for us also to keep in mind. And again, I think it's very important for us in the shadow of all of what's happening in Gaza is not to forget the situation in the West Bank. Because Israel, again, have used this opportunity to further expand its settler colonial project in the West Bank. And they have direct investment in the settlement movement in the West Bank. Now we're talking about nearly 1 million Israeli settlers live in the West Bank, taking over Palestinian life. So putting Palestinians under effective military occupation, under control, obstructing any sort of meaningful life for Palestinians, erecting 1,000 checkpoints across the West Bank since 2003, October 2003. And these checkpoints represent a daily challenge for Palestinians. They represent a daily struggle for those who need to commute, including myself, where I commute from Ramallah to Bethlehem to work in my office in Bethlehem. And a journey of 1 hour can take anywhere between 2.5 to 3, 5 hours sometimes. You return back because the checkpoint is closed. And let me just give you one example of the sad reality or the difficult reality we face when we commute in the morning, for example. When you queue at the checkpoint, all the checkpoints are all around the cities and the towns and the villages of the Palestinians in the West Bank, and sometimes they lead to roads where settlers also move. And most of the checkpoints that leads into the settler traffic, they're closed from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and closed again from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. So that means that there is a deliberate effort to regulate the Palestinian traffic that gets into the settler traffic. So the checkpoints are closed when the settlers are leaving for their work, leaving for their school, and for businesses. So they give them the liberty to move around until everybody has got to where they want to be, and then they open the checkpoints for the Palestinians. So it's another effective apartheid practice being implemented in the West Bank. And in that context also, it's very important to really talk about the state-sponsored terrorism, the state-sponsored terrorist settler movement in the West Bank that is being armed. And I'm sure some of you might be aware that 200,000 machine guns were distributed to Israeli civilian settlers in the West Bank. And 300,000 more licenses are being granted now by Minister Ben-Gvir, Minister of Internal Security in the Israeli government. And those weapons have been used. So we're talking about 1,100 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank since October 2023, including 230 children. These weapons are being used to attack Palestinians, to destroy property, to confiscate more land in the West Bank, to attack livestock, to attack livelihoods of the Palestinian farmers living in the different Palestinian villages and communities across the West Bank. But the most important point to make here is that there is zero accountability for these settlers who are sponsored by their state to destroy Palestinian life and to destroy any glimpse of hope that Palestinians still have in their future in Palestine. Zero settlers were taken to court because of what they have done, including those who have killed Palestinians, including those who have torched a family southeast of the city of Nablus, killed all the members of the family. They torched their house and burned them alive. Zero accountability. And unfortunately, the world just turned a blind eye to all of this. We don't see this, doesn't make it to the international news most of the time. And again, in the context of this, all of this was happening for the past 100 years. What has changed in the last 2.5 years, it was condensed. We have seen the ugliest manifestation of it. But in the West Bank, land confiscation started in 1948. Displacement started back then. Punitive house demolition started back then. Arbitrary detention started back then. It was happening all the time since 1948. It's just when the Palestinians erupted against all of this, the world started to realize that maybe there is something wrong there that needs to be addressed. Maybe there is an occupation that needs to be addressed. Maybe there is an oppressed nation that have suffered what they have suffered, and there have been outcries of Palestinians across the world for many years, but very little meaningful engagements were done by third states, by governments across the world. In addition to that, of course, the Palestinians always hoped that international structures, international law structures would do justice to Palestinians. We have gone to the International Court of Justice, we have gone to the ICC, we've gone to the United Nations. There are resolutions of UN Security Council, in addition, of course, to resolutions from UN General Assembly. None of that was respected. None of it. And then there's still this, all of what we have established as a humanity after the Second World War is just fake system, or a system that only applies to the third world countries, does not apply to the West and the developed countries. There is hypocrisy at the international level. And unfortunately, Gaza became the mirror that showed the world its ugly face, that showed the world its double standards in terms of dealing with what's happening in Palestine. What we are seeing now, even in terms of the agreements that Israel has signed with the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1994, and in Oslo Accords, the Palestinians were asked and demanded to respect these agreements, which they did, but Israel did not respect them at all. So, as one of the most important aspects of the 1994 Oslo Accords is to freeze the settlement expansion in the West Bank. And what happened since 1994? Doubled, tripled, quadrupled. More settlers, more land confiscation, more settlement expansion, zero respect. There was supposed to be an opportunity for the Palestinian Authority to thrive between 1994 and 2000 in a hope to realize the Palestinian dream of having a sovereign state on the borders of 1967, as, of course, suggested by the West. The two-state solution is a Western-made solution that did not actually take into consideration the rights of the Palestinians. But all of this was not respected. Israel did not comply with any of either international law, international norms, or the accords and the agreements they have signed with the Palestinians since 1994. And this has brought us to modern-day Palestine, where it is very difficult for the Palestinians to maintain hope. And it's very difficult for the Palestinians not to be frustrated. It's very difficult for the Palestinians not to be thrown into despair. Because everything they've tried, it failed. So we tried peace negotiations for 30 years. And at the end of it, we just realized that Israel was actually buying time. It was just another effort to distract the global community with an illusion that is called the two-state solution, and go into negotiations while settlements were expanding, while settlers were being armed, while land was confiscated, while Palestinian life was continuing to degrade in the West Bank by attacking livelihoods, by obstructing movement, by continuous military attacks, military incursions across the West Bank. And you have seen what happened in the north of the West Bank. There's a massive military campaign against the refugee camps in the northern part of the West Bank, in which we have seen the largest displacement wave since 1967. Today, there are 52,000 Palestinians that were kicked out of their homes in the refugee camps in the north of the West Bank, with no prospect for them to come back, because Israel has already bulldozed their homes in these camps. And they are trying to create a reality and a status quo on the ground where they want to get to a point where the Palestinians would think that there is no future in Palestine. Well, unfortunately, Palestinians are very resilient, and they've managed to maintain, I would say, the bare minimum when it comes to hope, and that's what keeps everybody, alive in that particular part of the world. But again, how long? For how long can the Palestinians actually continue to live that type of life? How long can they maintain to be oppressed? And how long until we see another October 7th again happening in Palestine? So these are the realities that we are facing. And in the middle of all of this, let me just also speak about how ActionAid responded to all of this. And I think we are one of the very few international organizations who have realized that the question of Palestine is not a humanitarian question. It's not about providing aid. It's not about keeping people alive under oppression and under occupation. It's not about distributing supplies and materials to those who are displaced. It's about a political commitment. It's about a commitment that we need to have as an international organization to address the root causes of what's happening. It's to talk about occupation. It's to talk about respect of international law. Is to tell, the truth about what's happening on the ground. It's a genocide. Do we have to explain it? Do we have to justify it? It's a genocide happening in broad daylight, broadcasted on live TV across the world. So I think that gave us a very unique position when it comes to our situation as an international organization. It brought us closer to the community. It brought us closer to the people that we serve, and ensured that we continue to be a principled organization. We continue to be an organization that live up to its identity. We are not pro, plain language or neutral language that does not actually do justice to those who are oppressed or the victims of what's happening. We have been bold. We have been issuing statements. We have been talking about what's happening. We've been supporting our local partners to have a voice and to speak for themselves about what's happening. Of course, in addition to all of that, we've been very much engaged in providing humanitarian aid, because we need also to be the lifeline of the people. We need to keep people alive. We need to provide food. We need to provide shelter. We need to provide psychosocial support. We need to provide shelters for women. We need to provide shelters for children. So I think we've mobilized everything we can as a federation and made it available for our local partners to respond, because those who have stayed on the front line, the partners that we worked with, they stayed there. They never left. They moved with the people. They were displaced with the people. They were moving from one corner to another. And every time they moved, they established themselves again within the communities, within the shelters, and they provide services. And that was our commitment for them, is to continue there, to be there and serve, no matter what the challenges are. Because we understand that Israel is not going to make our life easier. On the contrary, they are now introducing deliberate policies to delegitimize international organizations. They have attacked a UN agency. They have shut down UNRWA. They bulldozed their headquarters on live TV. And what did we get back from the world? Condemnation, empty statements that stayed there again in the news cycle for 24, 48 hours, and nothing after that. Setting precedent. Israel is setting precedent and being a negative inspiration for totalitarian regimes across the world in terms of what they can do. In addition to that, of course, we have seen that Gaza and the West Bank have become an experiment playground for Israel when it comes to weapons, when it comes to introducing shadow parallel mechanisms to humanitarian systems by establishing private agencies to provide aid, to undermine the role of the UN, to undermine the role of international organizations. This is becoming an inspiration for so many other in the world that can be applied in other conflicts. And all of this, we don't have to forget that it's actually facilitated, supported, invested in by the United States. There is I would like to say that wherever there is evil in the world, the United States has a finger there, unfortunately. And with the current geopolitics in the world, the whole world doesn't look good. The whole world. We don't know where we're going with the current geopolitics in the world, unfortunately. So let me finish by saying that we definitely need to stand together as human beings. Today it's Palestine. Yeah, we need to be active, we need to be engaged, we need to provide support and stand in solidarity with Palestine. But we're doing it for the world. We're not doing it only for Palestine. There are many other just causes in the world that we need to mobilize around and continue to provide solidarity, because this is becoming an important step for us to ensure that it doesn't happen somewhere else. It doesn't come to our doorstep here in Australia some years from now. We don't know. I hope not. But if we continue in the same direction, we're setting precedent in the world for so many bad things, so many horrible things that regimes across the world can adopt and adapt to their context and use in the future. So let me finish by, again, thanking you for coming tonight, thanking you for your continuous support, and please feel free. We will have time for questions. We're very much open for any type of question. Feel free to ask about things beyond the news. If there is anything you would like to know more about what's happening in Palestine, we'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamil, for that powerful testimony, and I mean, which really highlights the huge hypocrisy, the impunity of the Israeli state, and what it is like to live under occupation, and just a very challenging reminder of the genocide that we're living through right now. So thank you. And we're going to now have a conversation with Jamil, but I'd really like to welcome two other people to join us up here. Noura Mansour, who's an educator, community organizer, and political analyst from Akka in Palestine, and the National Director of Democracy in Colour. Welcome, Noura.
Shukran.
And also Sarah Baarini, who is an Naam-based activist and organiser with the Free Palestine movement of Lebanese, Italian and Maltese heritage, and a past executive member of the Islamic Council of Victoria. Thank you both for joining us. And so, as Jamil said, after we've had a few questions in this conversation, you'll also have a chance to ask questions of our panel here. But to start with you, Jamil, you've spoken about the situation for Palestinians in Gaza and also on the West Bank. And many organisations have found, that Israel, and have declared that Israel is practicing apartheid, including human rights organisations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem as well. And earlier this year, I think many of us saw as Israel's Knesset adopted a new death penalty law that the UN has said perpetuates racial discrimination against Palestinians and amounts to a grave erosion of human rights. I guess we'd like to bring that here and talk about what does this mean for Palestinians in the occupied territories?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Again, just referring to the direct manifestation of the apartheid regime. So when first and foremost, I think when you have two different sets of laws that apply to two different people living on the same land, that is apartheid. The Israeli settlers living in the West Bank, they are actually under the Israeli civil law, while the Palestinians living in the West Bank, they're still under the military orders of 1967, which means the Israeli military commander of the West Bank has the ultimate authority to issue arrest orders, demolition orders, clear military incursions into even Area A where the Palestinian Authority is, and so on. So putting the military commander as the ultimate commander of the West Bank without any need to go through the judicial system. There are two sets of laws that apply to the two different groups of people living in the same territory. That's apartheid. When we have road networks that are exclusive for two groups of people, that is also apartheid. And when we have movement restrictions that apply to one group but does not apply to the other group, that is also apartheid. And then again, on the bill, on the death penalty bill, I think it's important to note that Palestinians were not surprised. This is not the first time, and this is not probably the most controversial one. And we will continue to see these being legalized, acts of apartheid being legalized in the Knesset, And I always say, they always legalize what is impossible to be legalized. So starting from the nation state bill, Israel passed a bill in the parliament stating that Israel is a nation state for the Jewish people. This also undermines the minorities living in Israel, not only the Palestinians who live in Israel. In addition to that, of course, we have the discriminatory house demolition, punitive house demolition orders in the West Bank, where any Palestinian that commits any act against Israel, the punishment goes to the whole family. So even if that particular person has one specific room in the full building, they come and demolish the full building. These are punitive policies implemented in the West Bank, and they're also part of an apartheid system. Other laws have been adopted in the Knesset, but in terms of the death penalty, I think the very dangerous precedence here is the fact that there are serious concerns that with the current right-wing government, that this law will be weaponized, it will be activated, and they will implement it. But also another important factor to consider is that there's nowhere in the new bill that excludes children from this death penalty. And we know Israel prosecutes the Palestinian children from the age of 12. So there are many children who are detained in Israeli prisons, and they could be subject to this death penalty, where we don't see that there is any exclusion or exception for them in the new death penalty. This is to say that, again, I think the point I want to make here is Michelle, that we will, if the status quo of the world continues, the silence continues, the empty statements and condemnation continues, Israel is going to continue to practice or to implement and introduce more and more discriminatory policies that are only targeting Palestinians in an act that is a continuation of the genocide that is happening in Gaza, but in a different way, of course.
Yeah, thanks, Jamil. I mean, I think that it's we see many, we were discussing this the other night, that we see many statements of deep concern of, countries speaking out, but actually not taking any action. So, we'll also have some discussion about some of the kinds of actions that can be taken to address this situation that, is nothing short of impunity for a whole range of discriminatory practices, genocide, breaches of international law. The list goes on. Sarah, we might come to you next and actually, I guess, turn our attention to Lebanon. Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, have publicly endorsed a vision of Greater Israel, which refers to an expansion of Israeli territory into neighbouring countries, including Lebanon. And we've seen escalating attacks over recent months on Lebanon, and which, many see as Israel repeating the same pattern as with Gaza, attacks on civilians, on infrastructure, on personnel, on, everything, even including water supply. I guess it'd be good to hear your reflections on the current situation in Lebanon.
Thanks. I think it's important to make it clear that what we're seeing in Lebanon is a direct result of the international community failing to stand up for Palestinians and failing to ensure that they are guaranteed and granted justice and liberation. We talk about what's happening in Palestine being the litmus test for humanity, and we are seeing the consequences of us failing that through the ongoing escalated genocide in Gaza, and now also the invasion of Lebanon. It is unbelievable that we are witnessing a time in which Israel is carrying out gross human rights violations, really invading territory and lands which are internationally recognized as sovereign, and the international community is failing to take any action. What we're seeing in Lebanon is a mirror, so to speak, of what has been occurring in Palestine for over 78 years now. And so I think that we as individuals and as an international community have no one to blame other than ourselves, because really over the last 78 years, Israel has been empowered repeatedly to continue to violate international law, to continue to occupy land, to continue to massacre people without any accountability, without any attempts to uphold international law, and with every excuse under the sun given to them. And we're seeing that being pushed through Lebanon as well. I think Israel hasn't made its plans a secret since the establishment and the formation of the Zionist ideology. It's been clear what the Greater Israel Project is and what the overall Zionist ambitions are, which is the complete occupation of Lebanon, obviously starting Palestine is at the forefront, and then moving on to Lebanon, Syria, and I will note that the Golan Heights are occupied at present as well, and then pushing on through to Jordan and parts of Egypt as well. So, like, we know all of this. They don't make any secret of it. It is clearly written in Zionist material, but our governments continue to turn a blind eye. Continue to turn a blind eye to people being massacred, continue to turn a blind eye to ethnic cleansing. So, like, 78 years of this, of course, we're going to see that pushed further. But there has been no consequence to date at all. And so what is stopping Israel? Nothing. No one, really.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, I guess we'd like to turn our attention to what can stop Israel. And I guess I'd like to bring you in, Noura, and particularly, I mean, you've worked in the West Bank, you know what it's like to live under occupation. And I guess as you're seeing this situation unfold, you know, what do you think the international community can do in this situation? I mean, is there a role for things like sanctions, arms embargoes? You know, what can make a difference?
Thanks, Michelle. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are on stolen land, and we're having this conversation on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. To answer your question, I think there's a very important point that I would like to make, echoing Sarah and echoing Jamil, which is we are here today. We have hundreds of thousands of Palestinians massacred on a daily basis, where Palestinian death is normalized, genocide is happening, at the backdrop, and the world just continues business as usual. We are here today because of the response of the international community to the Palestinian plight. Because 78 years ago, the United Nations officiated the ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people. It accepted Israel, and it accepted the crimes that Israel has committed against Palestinians, including my family directly and Jamil's family, as a fact, as something that needed to happen to establish a Jewish state that is based on Jewish supremacy. It's important to keep in mind, and we need to be crystal clear with this, that Zionism is a settler colonial ideology. It's a Ashkenazi, Jewish white supremacist ideology. And it's since day one, as mentioned in Jamil's opening, a century old, and the ethnic cleansing and the colonization of Palestine by the Zionist movement took different forms and ways and waves, and manifested in different ways as well. From purchasing of lands, stealing lands, colonizing lands, and then committing massacres against Palestinians in 1947, denial of right of return, destruction of over 530 villages and towns in Palestine, creating 2 million internally displaced Palestinians and denying their right to return to their ancestral land, while also being citizens of the Israeli state, creating an apartheid regime that extends from Akka through different laws, over 70 laws that discriminate against the indigenous population in Palestine, all the way to the West Bank, where you have 3 million people living really with no legal status, under occupation, settlement expansion, checkpoints, as Jamil mentioned, where I remember when I was working in Ramallah and I had to go back from the West Bank to my hometown in the north, we had to, you just had to be in your car for 4 hours because there's an 18-year-old boy with a rifle who's drunk on power, and he decided that that's it. He's just going to sit and watch everyone wait for 4 hours for no reason. So this is another manifestation of that colonization, of Zionist colonization of Palestine in the West Bank, the apartheid wall, and then the siege, the illegal and inhumane siege on over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, leading all the way to today's genocide, active genocide. We're seeing peak Zionism in Gaza. So just wanting to preface what I think the international community can do, and it should do, because it bears a huge responsibility to why we are here today. Because the response from, and when I say international community, obviously there's two levels to that. There's the official level, and then there's the grassroots level, and there's different stories to each. But the official level's response to the colonization of Palestine fluctuated since 1948, since accepting the colonization of Palestine, and then moving from conflict management to conflict resolution kind of strategies. Let's try and resolve the conflict, Oslo, not Oslo. And then Israel obviously doesn't abide by any accords or agreements or international law. And then maybe we don't resolve the conflict. Maybe we manage the conflict so that, in a way, so that we maintain the status quo just before, suppressing any potential intifadas or uprising or resistance. And really grant Israel the space and the resources that it needs by Western governments to further its expansionist project in Palestine and beyond Palestine, as we see today in Lebanon, in South Lebanon. But also Zionism and Israel as an expansionist project is not new. Israel occupied Lebanon and was there, for 20 years until it got forced to leave in 2006. 2000, that's right, 2000. And then Israel as a concept and a practice has no official borders. There's no constitution. Further indicate that Israel's project is not over yet. As mentioned also by Michelle, the Greater Israel Project is something that is very out in the open in Israeli society, and people, there's a high level of consensus behind this ideology. So we're here, the Palestinians are here because of complacency and because of a complicity of international community. So what can the international community do then to ensure that this does not continue, because the Palestinians do not deserve to continue living like this, and also to prevent this from spreading and spilling out to Lebanon and Iran and, who knows when, what's next? Venezuela? So two things, right? The grassroots. The grassroots needs to continue mobilizing. So what we're doing here today is a clear example of what we can continue to do to ensure that Palestine is on the agenda. It's centered in every social justice, racial justice, economic, climate justice discussion, to ensure that when we talk about any issue, any progressive issue, the Palestinians are included in that discussion. To continue mobilizing, to continue advocacy, and to continue really talking about Palestinians and humanizing Palestinians, because the extent to which the Palestinian people have been dehumanized is not just, it's not just, this is why we're here, right? It's easy. Everyone's used to Palestinians just being bombed and Palestinian children being abused. And we hear this and it's just news. It's just, this is what happens every day. And obviously the media, the mainstream media, plays a significant role in normalizing the Palestinian suffering. So we need to refuse and reject that this is normal. This cannot be normal, and we have to not treat this as normal. So how do we then humanize the Palestinian experience and push back against not just the vilification and demonization of Palestinians, but even solidarity with Palestinians is currently being vilified and demonized. So not only the Palestinians, from a Zionist perspective, the Palestinians can or should be bombed, but also you as people should be not expressing solidarity and not saying this is wrong. What is happening in Palestine is wrong, because then there'll be consequences for you. So how do we protect the Palestinians, but also protect Palestinian solidarity, protect the space for people like, like us, like you here, to be able to wear your kufiyi, to be able to talk about Palestine with your neighbors, to be able to say Israel is committing genocide without being labeled or demonized or vilified. So continue mobilizing, continue advocacy, keep having this conversation, because eventually what we need, what Palestinians on the ground need, is for us to change our local context here. We need to create the change here at home. How do we create the change here in a way that it doesn't continue with this complicity against the Palestinian people? So that is what the grassroots can do. The international, obviously, official level, I think it's straightforward, right? We need our governments here, our government in Australia, but also governments around the world, to abide by international law, to really treat Israel as a state that has been violating international law since 1948. Since they denied Palestinian refugees to go back to their homes, which is a violation of United Nations resolution. So impunity and the free hand that Israel has been given to further its really settler colonial project needs to end. And our role as grassroots is to push our governments to ensure that they abide by international law, because third-party states and corporations have the obligation under international law to prevent and punish other countries for the crimes of genocide.
Thanks, Noura. Well, I mean, you spoke about grassroots mobilization. So, Sarah, I'd like to come to you about that, because, I mean, we've seen over the last 2 years Australians mobilizing on the ground. I mean, perhaps the most significant moment that stands in my mind, at least, is, 300,000 people marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge. But we've seen a lot of protesting continuing. I guess because I guess, sometimes when we hear these things, it's easy to feel huge levels of despair. But from your perspective, do you think there have been some campaign wins, and what are we learning from our mobilization efforts?
Can I maybe just start by talking about despair just quickly? I think that I've noticed across the movement that a lot of people are feeling apathetic. I think that it's important that we remember two things. Firstly, that what we are witnessing, the ongoing genocide and occupation of Palestine, it isn't something that is new. It's been ongoing for over 78 years now. And we have a long journey ahead of us. Decolonization is not going to happen overnight. Liberation isn't going to happen overnight. It is only going to happen if each and every single one of us continue to resist and continue to take action. And the second thing, that's all right. Sorry, I lost my train of thought now. That's all right.
Thanks. Find your train of thought.
Thanks. And the second thing is that apathy is a luxury that we have here. And I know that maybe is uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear, but I think that it is a fact. It's a luxury that we have in the comfort of our own homes, in the so-called peace of living on this stolen land. It's not a luxury that Palestinians on the ground get to have. It's not a luxury that Palestinians in the diaspora get to have as they continue to be stressed about their loved ones that continue to live under occupation in Palestine. So this concept of apathy and despair, it is a luxury. And I think that we have a responsibility as allies to constantly keep that in the back of our minds and continue to think about the realities of the people on the ground, whether they're reported in the news or not, and allow that to continue to fuel us to keep going. Because as difficult as we may think that it is to keep going here, imagine losing your homes, your loved ones, living under brutal occupation and apartheid. You do not have the luxury to feel anything. You just kind of, I would imagine, have to keep going. So I think that that's really important for all of us to remember. In terms of the wins, I think the first thing that I want to say is that the movement has grown so much in a considerably short period of time. If we maybe fast forward like 5 years, the mobilization that we see in the grassroots did not look the same. I think Noura could attest to this, just in the context of NAM and the amount of people that would show up for rallies when they were called, whether they be snap actions or not. And that, I think that sentiment is reflected globally as well. The protests that we are seeing across the globe, literally in every single corner of the world, is incredible. And I think that it seems to be a momentum where people are keeping Palestine at the forefront. And I think that that is something that we need to continue to maintain. If we talk about in the Victorian context, I think even just in the short period of the last 2, almost 3 years, we've seen campaigns like the local council campaigns where, I mean, if you had said to us maybe 3-4 years ago that local councils would fly the Palestinian flag in front of the council chambers, we would say absolutely not a chance. But that is a reality. It happened because people kept pushing, because people were talking about Palestine, and because people are waking up to the atrocities that Israel's committing. The Victorian government did not renew its memorandum of understanding with Albert Systems. I think that that is another important win, even though maybe the Victorian government doesn't want to credit the Palestine movement for that. I think that, the movement continuously putting that memorandum of understanding at the forefront, and the Victorian government's relationship with a company that is participating in the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people was a direct, result of, our advocacy efforts. So I think we can safely take credit for that. So there are a lot of things. I mean, even on the international scale, Spain, for one, has imposed a lot of embargoes on Israel. We've seen recently, even in the context of Eurovision, I mean, a lot of countries, despite persistent calls for boycotts of Eurovision because of Israel's participation over the years, we've seen 5 countries withdraw and have chosen not to participate. We've seen Puma stop supporting the Israeli football team after 5 years of consistent campaigning from the BDS movement. So I think that there are a lot of wins. I think sometimes with everything that's going on, I know that these wins don't seem like a lot because the killing is still continuing, the occupation is still there and is still continuing, the genocide continues. I think we kind of need to remember that things are not going to change overnight. We can't, unfortunately, go from 0 to 100 that fast, even though we want to. The end goal is an end to the occupation, is a liberated Palestine, but there are going to be 1,000,001 steps, if not more, along the way. But we just need to kind of not lose sight of that and keep pushing as much as we can until we see the end result, which is a liberated and free Palestine.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, it's definitely good to have a hopeful, hopeful sort of sense that we can change the situation. And I think it really, we have seen the movement grow here in Australia. And I mean, we just have to keep working. We definitely can't give up. I think that's really what I'm hearing, from both of you very strongly, just how important and powerful that grassroots mobilization can be, at least in our country, to shift some of the politics. I guess I'd like to turn to you, Jamil, and I mean, and perhaps reflect in terms of where you're sitting. We've seen, obviously, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, are both hearing cases at the moment on the occupation of the West Bank and war crimes in Gaza. We've seen arrest warrants issued for both the Israeli Prime Minister and Defence Minister. Yet ethnic cleansing continues, genocide continues with impunity. So I guess from your perspective, I think, has the international system failed the people of Palestine? And, what can be done more to really shift this situation and hold Israel to account?
Yeah, the international system, first and foremost, failed itself before anybody else. It failed the world before it failed Palestinians. So this is a system that was put for the whole world, not for the Palestinians only. So any failure means a failure for the world. But in the context of Palestine, I would say that Palestinians have, they had ups and downs with their relationship with the international system. There were high hopes at some point that justice can be served and that accountability can be provided. And war criminals could be brought to justice, but unfortunately, the current world system, particularly the ICJ and the ICC, have no executive authority. They have no executive power. Their executive power lies in the obligation of the countries who have signed up to these international mechanisms. So when we see that two war criminals who have active arrest warrants by the ICC are able to fly across Europe and land in Europe, in different countries, with no respect whatsoever to the ICC, is just another testimony that what is happening is far beyond complicity. That is investment in the colonial enterprise. That is protection. That is providing political and diplomatic cover to an apartheid state, to a state that has no respect even for its allies. And I think probably many of you may not know, but last August, Israel closed down the Australian representative office in Ramallah, just because Australia said that they will recognize the state of Palestine. The Israeli foreign minister revoked their visas and their diplomatic status and kicked them out. So they have no respect for their allies either. And I can tell you from what I saw with my own eyes how Americans are treated at Israeli checkpoints in the West Bank, with all the support they get from the US. So they consider themselves above and beyond any international norm, any international accepted law, any international conduct or behavior. That's a state that and with that, I think, again, back to the Palestinians, it was very important for us to continue to maintain a narrative where, yes, we want justice to be served through the international system. Yes, we want the UN Security Council resolutions. We want the UN General Assembly resolutions to be implemented. Despite that, they're not 100% fair to the Palestinians, but at least they provided the bare minimum to establish an environment where peace can be realized. But again, we go back to the same point. There is no respect. There's no commitment. There's no abiding by any sort of obligation by the state of Israel. Up until this moment, I think it's very important to note that lots of Palestinian civil society actors are actively working to document the atrocities, to document the crimes, in the hope for justice to be served one day. So we have no other choice but to believe in the international system. We have to believe in it. It's something we created together as humanity, and we have to protect it, and we have to believe that one day it's going to salvage itself and create an executive capability for that system to be able to hold states like Israel accountable. And because there are many other examples across the world where we need that system to be effective, where we need it to be the system where everybody looks for accountability and justice.
Thanks, Jamil. A final question to you, Noura, before we open to questions from the floor. We've seen around Australia increasing attempts to silence Palestinian voices, Palestinian movements, restricting protest rights, banning Palestinian or pro-Palestinian slogans. And it seems to be coinciding with this rise of the far right, anti-Palestinian sentiment, Islamophobia, attacks on migrants here in this country. And I guess I just wanted to reflect with you around how these political shifts have impacted the movement, and our efforts to continue to, demand justice in this context of the shrinking space that we're actually seeing in our own country.
Yeah, this is a really important question because I think there's definitely some of the threats that we face as civil society organizations and as movement in Australia. The first one being that there's an institutional crackdown on civil liberties and rights and democratic rights to really shrink the space for any solidarity, activism in support of Palestine, but also anything that challenges the institution. So there's that. And there's the other point that you mentioned with the rise of the popularity of far-right actors, including One Nation, Pauline Hanson, and other actors as well. I think these two are, there's a correlation between both. I think the crackdown, the institutional crackdown has created a space, let me clarify. So the institutional crackdown on the civil society movements and organizations and the mobilization that was happening for the last almost 2.5 years in Australia has actually empowered the Australian civil society further. So the movement for Palestine and the mobilization that's been happening in support of Palestine has empowered and has created more space for civil society organizations that are not necessarily Palestinian focused here in Australia to actually do more, right? So when you push the limits, you create more space for everyone. And the Palestine movement has been spearheading that push in the last 2.5 years. So there was a push in support and in favor of civil society and movements and grassroots movements. And followed by that, there was a crackdown from institutions and governments through the introduction of these laws, banning of certain slogans and whatnot. And that has empowered and emboldened actors such as Pauline Hanson and far-right neo-Nazis to actually start resurfacing and to gain support. So I think these two are connected. And I think this is a really a pivotal moment for the civil society here in Australia, because what we're seeing, we need a cross-movement strategy to be able to push back against both institutional threats and far-right threats. And this is talking about the broader movement, right? And I'm not just talking about the Palestine movement now, I'm talking about the broader civil society in Australia. In Democracy in Color, and maybe this is where I talk about how I think, but also from a Democracy in Color perspective, how we think the strategy moving forward, pushing against those threats, is really the most effective one. Which one is the most effective one? I don't know if maybe some of you have heard about Democracy in Color, but it's an organization that works for racial justice across the intersection of the broader movement for justice, be that climate justice, social, economic, starting with First Nation justice as well. So the work that we do on Palestine falls under our third strategic pillar. So that's the solidarity pillar, in which we actually work together with other movements, including the Movement for Palestine. Democracy in Color reached out to APAN. I was at that time the movement building lead at APAN. They reached out, and then they offered solidarity to support when the genocide really accelerated on October 8th, 2023. So organizations like Democracy in Color offer support because that's what you do, as solidarity, as movement for justice. That's what you do, really. And then from that point, Democracy in Color has been really heavily involved in the Movement for Palestine, supporting different initiatives, different organizations and groups across the continent, and then hired a Palestinian national director. So that's how you, I guess, practice what you preach. When we talk about really centering lived experience and expertise and impacted communities, this is how you do it, right? You empower, you uplift those voices and those who have been doing the work as well. And then solidarity can really manifest in different ways. But from a Democracy in Color perspective, solidarity as a strategic pillar really is leaving no one behind. How do we ensure that when we talk about democracy and everyone's democratic rights to really express their political views, including, criticism of a foreign country such as Israel, that these rights are not undermined and they're not really jeopardized or limited. From our end, Democracy in Color is interested in building a racial justice network, and this is in our operational plan. In the next 3-4 years, we hope that by 2030 we have a fully established racial justice network that really meets once a year and talks about all racial justice issues, including Palestine and how Palestine fits in the broader civil society landscape and political landscape in Australia. So follow Democracy in Color if you don't, and support our work because, as you know, thank you, Husna. Shukran. And that is because, as you know, on this country doesn't think it has a racism problem, and this is right. So there's no need for Anti-Racial Discrimination Day. Let's call it Harmony Day, and using these kind of euphemism to just avoid saying we need to be anti-racist. Amazing. Well done. That was before my time. That was Husna's time. Yeah. So I think going back to your whole point, tackling far right actors, this is a very serious moment in the Australian politics. We've just seen the results of the by-election in Ferrer with One Nation securing their first lower house representative. So that is not a joke. And this is a moment that requires for all of us to get together and work in solidarity across movements to ensure that these really violent ideologies don't get empowered and don't move any further and don't gain more power and support.
Hear, hear. Now we'd like to open it up if you have questions of any one of these three incredible speakers who've given us so much food for thought tonight. And yeah, I guess really tried to highlight what we can do, what we absolutely need to do. And, particularly as the Palestinian people face such huge injustice. So can I ask who has a question? Okay, yes.